Welcome back to the Art Inside the Craft podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Glazier, and this is episode number 28. This episode features a super interesting singer-songwriter, Doug Levitt. Doug's debut album, Edge of Everywhere, has been over a decade in the making and was produced by multi-Grammy Award winner Trina Shoemaker. This album was inspired by Doug traveling around the country on Greyhound buses and writing songs about the people he meets along the way. Doug, who started his career as a London-based foreign correspondent for CNN and ABC, switched careers and began his life as a singer-songwriter. Doug and I discussed how that career change happened, some of the inspiration for a few of his songs, and what's coming up this summer with the album release. Listen in on that interview now with Doug Levitt.
So what I kind of like to do first, I guess, is before I get into the album, just have you tell me a little bit about, just for people who are listening and might not be as familiar with you, just a little bit about like where you grew up and when you actually started kind of playing music. If it was, I see you got a piano behind you, if that's what you started on or what you kind of got you kicked into music.
Yeah, I grew up in Washington, D.C., and I was in choirs, all kinds of choirs, everything, chamber, concert, gospel choir. I'll deny it, but I was in madrigals with the tights and everything. And to be honest, I tried piano when I was a kid, and I didn't love reading music. And so I think that it kind of was a disconnect for me. And then I ended up starting with guitar, and then many years later kind of coming back to piano and being like, oh, okay, now I've got not just enough knowledge to do something here. And so and I began writing songs, in my teens, very badly. And hopefully I've moved out of that phase. And so, yeah, it all just kind of, all pieces of this sort of meld together over time.
Cool. And then it kind of jumping ahead a little bit, I didn't want to go over too much ground, but like another interesting thing, your career before actually committing to singer-songwriter was very interesting. And so I didn't know if you wanted to touch on a little bit of like that career and how that led you into, finally making the decision to be a singer-songwriter.
Yeah, I was a foreign correspondent based out of London, and I lived in London for about 5 years. And after college, I think I knew to be honest, underneath I wanted to do music, but I didn't really have the gumption, and I don't know if I had the skills just yet or anything like that. But I journalism, as in and of itself, for me and living overseas, was a way to really see the world. And I ended up covering I went to places like Iran and Rwanda and Bosnia, and I felt it's hard not to be drawn into all of these stories. And so many of these countries you see in moments of real crisis and transformation, and what happens if when things fall apart, and civil society, and the things that we count on in the U.S. And I think I realized I was doing well enough at it at that point. I realized that if I didn't do music right then, I wasn't going to do it. And so, as you do, I just kind of, I became a singer-songwriter. I moved to Nashville. There were people in my family that were like, what happened to Doug? It seemed like everything has that guy gone off the rails. And it wasn't long thereafter in Nashville, which, by the way, I'm sure it's like it's like grad school for songwriting and musicianship. And somebody will say like, oh yeah, I pick a little from time to time, and then like the guitar will be on actual fire from there, picking a little from time to time. And so, but it was incredible. It was incredible, and I met people there that I would continue to work with, and so. But it wasn't long thereafter that I set out by Greyhound on what was my first 6-week tour by Greyhound. And the way that sort of ties in to, the work I was doing before, in part, is this idea of, life at a crossroads, both collectively and also individually. And I think as well, when I moved back to the States, I was struck and kind of sort of appalled by the level of inequality and increasing inequality. And I wasn't sure what, if anything, what I could do about it, but inspired by Depression era projects like that of Woody Guthrie and so many other luminaries, I decided to set out on a 6-week trip by Greyhound. At the time, you can't get it now, they don't exist now, but they did have something then called an Ameripass, which would allow you to get on or off any Greyhound in the country. And so,
oh, cool.
Yeah, it was really cool. And of course, there's so much of America. Greyhound serves something like, even after the pandemic, I think it's more than 20 times the number of destinations as the largest airline in America. So they're just,
wow.
Yeah. So there's so many parts of the country, and all on the same routes. You'll go through, one stop late towns, and you'll go through, metropolises that are rife with disparity there, and so I think once I started on that bus trip, and along the way I would play in everything from shelters and VAs to other small theaters, whatever I could kind of put together on the way, and I was kind of hooked. It was hard not to find myself struck and stirred by people's stories, and because, of course, not just because, but on Greyhound you have so many different populations that are represented, and that's veterans. I mean, we were just talking about before we started recording that I was kind of enamored of a project of yours with veterans, photo and video project. The picture of your father is really amazing, and
thank you.
Yeah, and there are so many veterans who travel by Greyhound, and I remember. I know you mentioned that you're doing some interviews with folks from the Korean War, and
yes,
and you will have on the bus, a guy who he's maybe in his 70s or 80s, and he's comparing battle cries with two newly minted Marines, and he's telling them what it's like to arrive in port during the Korean War at sunset, and there. Wow. So there's this, a real sense I have found on the bus of an unusual kind of community, because it's a transient and a very, time-bound community that makes me feel like sometimes, especially, late at night, and people are talking and they're telling stories about their lives, or the biggest challenges and what they've taken from it, or that it really does feel like a kind of a rolling congregation of souls traveling on the bus. And of course you also have a lot of ex-offenders. You have a lot of people who are caretakers for folks on the margins. You have just a cross-section of people, all of whom are traveling together for this period of time. And unlike, on a plane where you kind of get on and then you get off, you would have, you have a pre-dawn meal stop at a Jack in the Box. And then, you're transferring buses at 2 a.m, half asleep, and you're sort of, it's sort of hypnotic.
And so I'm glad that you got into that, kind of segued in. So with the album's creation, I just kind of had a little bit of like, I wasn't super, I mean, obviously you didn't have a ton of detail in like the bio, but when you did that, how did you get the idea initially? And then like on the initial 6 week pass, were you booking gigs and like getting on and off at certain locations? Was it kind of like you said, transient? And then, were you playing like a lot of just your own stuff, or were you doing a lot of cover stuff, or was it kind of like fill me in on how that whole project kind of ended up working out?
Question. I mean, look, when you're playing for people who don't know you at all, like if I'm in a station or if I'm playing at a VA, I'll lean on cover songs that people know and as a way to of course. Something that people can connect to immediately without having to, think too much about it and so, but I was always playing both. And yes, I would set things up sort of on the fly, and I wasn't necessarily a great planner. So I would maybe call, a day ahead from where I was going to be, or 2 days ahead, and get in touch with the VA, or get in touch with a local Salvation Army or another place. And the truth is that people there's so many places where, in my view, music is really needed, but it's not like people don't have that much access to it. So
right.
So it and of course the feedback loop is always positive. I mean, because you're touching somebody where they are and what they're the moment that they are in, and then that kind of comes back to you, and so but yeah, I would play both covers and songs I'd written or was writing on the way too.
Cool. Yeah, that was another thing I was kind of curious about. So the whole time that you've got this idea to do that, and then you're just kind of like out there writing songs as you go, huh?
Yeah, generally writing songs along the way or right after a trip, or I would have notes, and then something would kind of gestate for a little bit. But oftentimes I find that I write songs not long after meeting somebody, and of course let them know that they know exactly what I'm doing from the get-go, that this is what I'm traveling around by Greyhound, and I write songs about folks along the way, and so in recent times, or even before recent times, but because I have been doing this for a while now, but one gets a little bit nervous when you're playing a song about somebody else and their deepest, hardest experience is, and want to make sure that you're getting it right, and that not just the facts of it, but the kind of feeling state, and are you kind of honoring what the person has experienced. And thus far, everybody who I have been in touch with or remain in touch with, I think has felt somewhat kind of honored by it, or if not honored, touched by it, or certainly didn't try to hit me, didn't try to mow me down.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, not yet.
Yeah.
There's
always,
still time.
That's always a good reaction, is when they're just happy and not.
And the truth is, so many people, as we're talking about, so many people who travel by bus, that they don't have permanent phone numbers, or they don't have even necessarily a email address that they use or check, or so there are a lot of people whose information we may have exchanged information, or I got their information and wasn't able to get in touch with them. I mean, I think of one guy who I met who told me an incredible story about him and his father, and for years I tried to find him. He had given me a number and an address for his mom. I couldn't track her down, and then I sort of kind of gave up on it. And then I got a phone call out of the blue one day, and this guy said, hey, this is I don't know if you remember me. This is Brian. We met on a Greyhound, like, I don't know, 10 years ago. And we were talking, and I was like, wait, I was like, do you go by Boomer? And he said, yeah. And he said, I mean, Brian now, but, but Boomer. And he said, I had your number. I had a CD with me, and I thought about getting in touch. I ran across it again, and it couldn't have been nicer, and got in touch. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Super cool.
Yeah. Some really, because you can have a really deep connection with somebody in a shorter period of time. And certainly for me, if I'm like writing a song about somebody, then it's like their story is living with me over time too. So
yeah,
then to be able to kind of round the circle.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah.
And it's such a neat concept too, because, like you say, if you're on a plane, you're just kind of on and off in a couple hours maybe. But on like a bus, I mean, I've taken obviously a couple of trips. Like the last one I took was a few years ago with my son, and we just went to Minnesota, and it's like 4 hours. But that 4 hours that's a long 4 hours. I mean, it's just a long time to do it. He actually loved it.
Yeah.
He loves it as one of his favorite, and it was like a charter bus. We went to a football game.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like an actual Greyhound, but you're still, there's a lot of different people on there, and a lot of different experiences, and you're just there, you spend some time sleeping, and you spend some time chatting and talking about some things. It's a cool experience.
Thrilled to be traveling with Dad that way too.
And I think he was only like 6 at the time. So he's 10 now, but he's still like, Dad, when are we going to go on another bus ride? And I'm like, all right, let's do it.
Great. That's great. That's great. Yeah, it's a very specific kind of travel. It really is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, like I said, I love the album. The album's really cool. And I don't like to really go, I don't want to go song by song with what you've done. I would encourage people to go listen to it, really soak it in. But I do like to, I just picked out like a few songs, and I would just I would rather you tell me about it than me like saying, well, here's what I think it's about, or, whatever. But some of it, just a few of my favorites, and I mean, the whole thing could be favorites, but would you mind just explaining? I just picked 3. So like, we'll start with just like Cold Comfort. Yeah. Just like, what was your inspiration? Just a little blip about it.
Yeah. I mean, Cold Comfort, it's kind of like, we all have our vices, and we all have our vices in moments of great need, it feels like to us. And on the bus, that can be everything from, alcohol to heroin to, crack. I mean, but that feeling of, I woke up on the wrong side of myself again. And that kind of underlying sort of sense of pain and confusion and lack of clarity about what to do about any of it, and that so this idea of like, pour me another shot of cold comfort is like, it's that that palliative is only going to last a short period of time, and it's and it's something that people on the bus, that we all struggle with, but certainly on the bus, and on the bus when you're dealing with more difficult drugs to kick, and more difficult vices to kick, it can play a big part in people's lives. So that's kind of the derivation of that song.
Yeah, I really liked that one. It was just great storytelling.
Thanks, man.
And then L.A. River, that was another one that really grabbed me. I thought that was a cool song.
Yeah, L.A. River it's sort of about contradictions. And, there's a refrain that's like, when you're fast and free, the LA River. And of course, anybody who's spent time in LA or knows that the LA River is if anything, on a good day, is a tiny trickle. And so, there's not much that's fast or free about it. So it's kind of that things are free if you pay for it, and they're free if you pay for it later, and they're free if you pay for it in different ways. And so, there's a line in there that's something like, I got this fishing rod for the desert, got these boots for the water, but I'm dry as hell and I'm deep as rust. Now tell me, who do you trust? And so it really, I think, speaks to duality of existence and dealing with notions of wanting things to not be bone dry when they are in fact bone dry.
Yeah, that had some really cool lyrics, like you just said. I really like those. And then the last one that I kind of just chose was Disaster Can Wait.
Well, of course, disaster can't wait is the problem. And disaster shows up in all these different ways in our lives. And so the external disasters, and I've seen over time, people with the fallout of everything from Katrina to other, tornadoes and storms, and even people trying to, refashion their lives in new places or go back and try to rebuild their lives from before. And so it's really a kind of pay into the desire and the need for disaster to ultimately pay heed to what we want, whether or not that's the case is a separate issue.
Yeah. And I'll just mention too, I don't normally even ask artists to not really explain their songs, but I kind of felt it was so integral to what this album is and the whole story. And I don't know if theme is the right word, but it was just so cool that I just thought, well, I'll just pick those three and kind of have you talk a little bit about them. And
well, I appreciate that, Jeremy.
Cool. Yeah. So what is coming up as far as with this album release or the tour, or what's your plan, I guess, coming up for people who want to follow along or stop out and see you?
I'll be performing at Lincoln Center in New York towards the end of this month. I will be doing a number of other dates on the East Coast. I'll be playing this summer at Summerfest. I'm also working with an organization called Guitars for Vets.
Okay.
I'm really very honored that they have made me an ambassador for their organization. It's an incredible organization that essentially does kind of what it says. It provides, in order to somehow affect PTSD in our veteran population, they provide guitars and lessons to veterans and have 100+ chapters across the country. And so I will be doing a tour in conjunction with that organization, and along the way stopping in places and doing everything from instrument drives and stopping at VAs. And then in the UK, I'll be performing this summer at Maverick Festival. It looks like the Black Deer Festival and Cambridge Folk Festival. And along the way, we'll be touring for the record and with the record.
I want to send a huge thank you to Brian Ross at Missing Piece Media for reaching out about Doug's album. Thanks to Doug for taking the time to discuss the album and the inspirations behind it. His album, Edge of Everywhere, will be dropping on May 12th, so follow his website and social media to see where his tour will take him. I'd also suggest checking out the 2018 BBC World Service documentary called The Greyhound Diaries, which was done about his Greyhound travels. There are links in the description to Doug's website and social media, as well as guitarforvets.org link, of which Doug is an ambassador. Stay tuned and please subscribe to stay up to date, and as always, I will see you all down the road.